anyone in the room who is either a sponsor or a refugee. Could everyone stand?
The people who just stood up essentially let Catrin and I into their lives at a really vulnerable point, at a point at which both the sponsors and the refugees were trying to do something incredibly hard. And you opened your homes and you opened your private thoughts to us and you let us tell your story to the world. And we really could not be more grateful to all of you. So the reason we wanted to embark on this series was that, you know, I think it all goes back to the moment when we first heard about private sponsorship in Canada. We heard about it in December of 2015 from Sarah Fulford, the editor of Toronto Life magazine, who is here somewhere in the audience tonight. And immediately, Catrin and I were intrigued because it was so different than what was happening in the U.S. So much of the rest of the world was essentially feeling either hesitant or hostile towards Syrian refugees. And the fact that Canada was not only welcoming Syrian refugees, but doing it so personally, and that private sponsorship was such a leap of faith from one person on one side of the world who had never met the other party on the other side of the world, and with so little information was willing to take on this year-long commitment. We were interested in it in the news sense of what does this say about the refugee crisis and ways to address it, and why is Canada so different than the U.S.? But we were also interested in the deeper human questions. Can ordinary people really intervene in one of the world's worst problems? What is it like for refugees trying to adapt to North American society? What is the nature of trying to help another person, and what are the limits to the ways you can help? What are the cultural differences that are going to come up in this process? And then I think our biggest question of all was, is this going to work? And we just really wanted to know the answer to it. And we knew that it wasn't like a 500-word answer. It was going to take a lot of really deep reporting to figure that out.
Many of the groups, and I think a lot of the Canadian response, was to that photo of little Alan Kurdi on the beach, his body being washed up on the beach. And so many of the people that you profiled as Canadians said that was the catalyst, like that was the picture that launched 10,000 humanitarians. I'm wondering what your own personal reaction was to that photo, and also what was your reaction to people you knew in the United States? What was the American reaction to that?
It's interesting. Americans were just as horrified by that photo as Canadians. The difference is that in Canada there was an infrastructure through which that horror could be channeled into doing something. And in the U.S., the resettlement agencies reported huge surges in phone calls, people saying, what can I do? This is horrific. How can we help? And in many cases, it's sort of patchwork in the U.S. Depending on where you live, depending on the agency near you, you may be able to volunteer in some limited way. In some cases, there is a more intense involvement, which in some ways looks a bit like the Canadian model of private sponsorship, and where sponsors are really heavily involved in the lives of the refugees and helping settle them. But in many cases, these resettlement agencies are so strapped that they don't even have a way to navigate volunteer requests. Like, that's overwhelming to them. And so there was, in a way, it fell flat. There was just such emotion in the U.S. that wasn't able to go anywhere.
So you think if there had been this model, it would have worked there too?
I think many Americans would have wanted to step forward and wanted to do something. Of course, we don't have this deep tradition of private sponsorship that you have in Canada, so it would have been a new thing. But there was so much interest.